There's a heap of great throttles on the market, and this one seems to be quite highly rated. But is it really worth the 4-star reviews, or does it fall short? Today we're going to take a closer look at the TQS Mission Pack from Thrustmaster. I'll test it out, check out a few Amazon reviews, and share my honest thoughts, including a few things I think that could be improved. Quick note, Thrustmaster did send this unit for testing and review but had no input in this video. So the TQS Mission Pack, let's break it down. It comes in two parts, the throttle and what you might call a button box or control panel. You can pick up the full pack on Amazon for just under $500 US, and that's what we're looking at today. Now, this might represent great value for some more than others. Remember, you can also buy the standalone Viper panel for $249, or the Viper throttle on its own for $349. If you do go for the full pack, you'll save around $100. Keep these prices in mind as we move through the video because everything ties back to that. Let's talk about the basic features and what it does well and what it doesn't. First off, this is essentially a one-to-one replica of a real F16 throttle. So the design of the throttle handle isn't really up for debate. It's based on the real thing, and from what I can see, they've absolutely nailed it. It even adds a few extra switches like the push switch on the antenna and the elevation knob, and the switch under the throttle. And they've added them in a way that it doesn't interrupt the original F16 design. The under throttle switch, which is supposed to be some sort of blackout switch, but it isn't supported in DCS as far as I know. I've heard a few complaints about this switch that it interferes with the overall ergonomics and design. Now, personally, I get used to it pretty quickly and actually prefer having it rather than not. There's also a little rocker and push switch beside the speed brake for zooming the VR view. I found that switch a bit difficult to use, and in VR I ended up just using the click function for centering my head instead. And then for the zoom, I'd use this axis on the actual panel at the bottom. Thrustmaster advertises this, and I'm going to quote this directly: "Enjoy faithful replication of the Viper throttle's mechanical movement along its axis with thrilling and smooth travel. Thanks to the metal bearings, Viper TQS reproduces the real feeling with its legacy axis rail with access to idle cutoff and afterburner detents via mechanical levers and handle rotation." Now, I've never flown an F16, so I can't comment on every detail. However, I can say that this is one of the smoothest, if not the smoothest, throttle axis I've ever experienced. They really knocked it out of the park here. There's a tension adjuster on the back side so that you can tighten it to get just the right feel for you. But the actual motion, the motion of the throttle is just majestic. It also features an authentic style liftgate function that moves from cutoff and idle and into afterburner. I know of one other F16 throttle which is from Winwing, and while its smoothness is close, in terms of the pure feel of the axis, I think Thrustmaster comes out on top. If you've tried them both, let me know your thoughts in the comments. For the rest of it, all the plastic switches are of a reasonable quality, though there is a slight looseness with the dogfight and the speed brake switch. Nothing that would really worry me though. The highlight of the throttle assembly is the chaff flare sort of bash button. There's something super satisfying about having it built right into the throttle unit. What a brilliant addition. The only issue is that if you want to use this feature, I think you have to hard mount the unit. Otherwise, it's going to tend to move around and wobble. Unless you're super gentle, of course. But most of the fun, for me anyway, comes from giving it a good old bump. So I definitely recommend hard mounting it. Now let's talk about the Viper panel, which is this bottom portion here. All of the knobs are plastic, though it does retain those high quality Warthog sort of metal style toggle switches. There's a metal plate on the side, but the rest of it looks to be plastic. It's not quite up to the same standard of materials as the original Warthog, but it still feels very good. I was genuinely surprised by the quality, even though a few aspects missed the mark, which I'll get into in a second. As far as functionality, you get all the basics: landing gear, jettison, master arm, stores configuration, and some basic autopilot functions. But there's something not quite right here. My landing gear lights did not work out of the box. After a bit of googling, I found that this is a known issue. Fortunately, a Brightspark in the community developed a Lua script that lets DCS talk to the Thrustmaster software, which in turn gets your gear lever and your transition lights working. It's a bit of a process, but I'll leave the link in the description. I do think it's a bit of a miss that we have to get technical for it to work out of the box. And one other thing, a common thought, is that the gear lever feels a little bit cheap. It's very small and a little bit plasticky. I do agree with this, and I wish they'd put just a little bit more effort into that. Before moving on, I want to give a quick overview of the build quality as a whole. The throttle unit does have an aluminium handle and the side plate, along with aluminium throttle rails. The rest is mostly high quality plastic that's really well put together. You can tell there's a lot of attention to detail, even up close. All the buttons and switches are excellent, except for that gear lever that we mentioned, and those two Lucys that I mentioned at the beginning. When comparing the build quality to the original Warthog, the Warthog definitely feels a bit beefier and heavier, but the TQS mission pack still holds its own. The materials might differ, but the overall build quality, I'm going to say it's comparable. Now that is up for argument, so if you have experience with both of those throttles, let me know what you think in the comments. Now let's talk about the value and who this throttle is for, because with this product, value and the right customer are very much tied together. Is there value at around $500 US? Certainly the build quality is fair for what you're paying, but to really get your money's worth, you should be flying the F-16 most of the time. Couple that with the excellent build quality, the smooth throttle axis, probably the best I've felt, and the fact that it's a replica, all that combined, you wouldn't be disappointed as an F-16 pilot. And saying that, if you fly a variety of planes or sims, you might want to think twice. Sure, it's a cool piece of gear with a great feel, but it's so laser focused on the F-16 that it might not be natural or as natural for other aircraft. It's still doable, but it's just not going to be the best all-round option. Let's see what some of these other people say about it on the Amazon reviews. Okay, so we're going to look at some of these reviews just to see what people are actually saying. So the first one we're looking at here works great and looks and feels like the actual throttle. Now when you read into this, it actually looks like this guy may have worked on F-16 jets. So he's saying when you rest your hand on the throttle, it just fits, all the switches are right there. I worked on the F-16 for many years and it just feels right in your hand. And it goes on a little bit more. I would agree with that. I think that's probably not the design on Thrustmaster's part, that's just the design of the F-16 stick. Or throttle for that part. Next, wow, amazing product, well done Thrustmaster. He's talking a little bit about the price. He's picked up the plastic gear lever, which was one of my gripes, but he's saying here that overall the most important component, the throttle quadrant itself, is worth every penny. And I agree with that, but these are two 5-star reviews. Let's see if we can find... Here we go. Here's a 3-star. Slightly disappointed. The switches all work great, but the knobs and landing gear are just plastic. Yep, I do agree with that. Not to mention the landing gear is only one button. The lights for the landing gear indicator and the knob do not work at all. Now I also did bring this up and there is a way to get that working, and I will leave those links in the description. Then we've got a 1-star don't bother. Please go with Winwing or another company. And again, he's talking about those LED lights. And like, whilst I agree with him about the LED lights, 1 star, certainly a bit harsh. A few more 5 stars. Amazing throttle, super nice and great feeling buttons. Yep, I agree with that. Good, but not great. Interesting. I only bought the panel as I have the Warthog HOTAS, so this guy's just bought the actual panel itself. It's a nice add-on, but it's much lighter than the HOTAS and feels a bit cheap in comparison. I agree somewhat with that. I think the materials aren't quite as heavy as the original Warthog, but I do disagree with the fact that he says it feels cheap in comparison. As far as I'm concerned, it certainly does not feel cheap. So looking at all these reviews on Amazon, there's a lot of 5 stars there. There's a couple of 4s. There's a 3 and a 1. I think there's a few ones that are overly harsh there. But when you look at the star rating overall, we're getting 4.2 out of 5. And I honestly think that's pretty much deserved across the board for the throttle as a whole. Keeping in mind, you can actually fix the lights coming on with the landing gear with that Lua script that I've put in the description. Okay, time for the pros and the cons. So we'll start with the pros. There's a great build quality overall with just a few minor issues. Absolutely superb for F-16 flyers with an authentic design. The tension adjustment on the back for the throttle axis is superb, and that goes hand in hand with one of the smoothest throttle motions I've ever experienced. I think it's fairly priced if you're the right kind of customer. The one-to-one replica design is excellent for F-16 pilots, and that's both a pro and a con. Now for the cons, the gear lever does feel like an afterthought. Extra work is required to get the gear lights syncing up. The design and the functionality are very F-16 specific. It isn't as plug and play as advertised. I did have to fiddle around in DCS, assigning a button or 2 here and there and reversing a few axes in the tuning menu. To sum it up, the design and the build quality are typical of Thrustmaster's other high-end gear. They paid attention to all the right details, delivering a superb experience with the throttle handle and a decent experience with the button box. The only real disappointments are the gear lever and the fact that the lights don't work out of the box. Everything else is well constructed and thoughtfully designed. I'd suggest purchasing this only if you fly the F-16 more than, let's say, 70 or 80% of the time. If that's you, then this is a no-brainer. But if you fly a little bit of everything, you might be better off with something more generic.